It was the first day of the semester. The large lecture hall was filled with the soft hum of conversations. Students were settling in, flipping open their laptops, sipping on coffee, and waiting for the professor to arrive. Sundar Pichai sat quietly. In the second row from the front, he wore a simple shirt, clean but old, and kept his backpack neatly beside his feet. His eyes scanned the room, calm and curious. Taking in every detail, he had arrived in the United States just 3 weeks earlier. Everything still felt unfamiliar. The streets were wide, the accents sharp, and the food tasted strange. But Sundar didn't complain. He had come here with a dream, and dreams didn't come easy. Suddenly the door slammed open. A tall man in a tweed jacket walked in briskly, carrying a leather briefcase. His gray beard looked sharp against his red scarf. The chatter in the room died. Instantly he stood before the class and looked at them for a long moment. "My name is Professor J. Armitage," he said. "Welcome to Global Leadership and Innovation. Or, as I like to call it, the class that will separate the thinkers from the dreamers." Some students laughed nervously. Sundar remained still. Professor Armitage narrowed his eyes at the group. "Before we begin, I want to try something," he said, pacing slowly. He pointed at a student in the back. "Tell me something you invented?" The student stuttered, unsure. He moved to another. "You know, what about you?" One by one, most students shook their heads. Then his eyes landed on Sundar. "You, front row, where are you from?" "India, sir," Sundar replied softly. Professor Armitage raised an eyebrow. "India, And what exactly makes you think you belong? In a class about global leadership?" The room grew silent. Sundar paused for a moment.
"I believe leadership is not about where you're from. It's about what you do with what you have." A few heads turned. Some students nodded slightly. The professor chuckled. "A poetic answer," he said. "Let's test your ideas with something real."
He turned to the board and wrote a problem. It was complex, full of variables, assumptions, and projections. "Solve this," he said. Handing the marker to Sundar, Sundar stood up slowly, walked to the board, and studied the problem. His hands trembled slightly. He picked up the marker, wiped the board clean, and started writing. He didn't solve the problem directly. Instead, he restructured it. Line by line, he simplified the chaos into a pattern. He used no flashy words, no big hand gestures, just quiet, clear steps. After 5 minutes, he turned around. "This is one way," he said. Professor Armitage stared at the board. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Interesting," he said slowly. "But leadership is not about solving problems like a machine. It's about presence, passion, persuasion. I see you can calculate, but can you lead?" Sundar didn't reply. After class, students whispered about the exchange. Some admired him. Others rolled their eyes. Sundar just walked out of the room quietly, his face unreadable. Later that day, he sat alone under a tree near the library. He opened a small notebook. Inside were scribbled ideas, half-coded software concepts, app designs, notes on human behavior, dreams of something greater. A young woman approached him. "Hey," she said, smiling. "I saw you in class today." I was brave. He looked up, surprised. "Thank you," he said. "I'm Emily," she added. "Computer science, second year. I'm Sundar." They shook hands. "Don't let him get to you," she said. "Professor Armitage is brilliant, but he has opinions." Sundar smiled. "I noticed." They talked for an hour. Code. About life. About what it meant to come from somewhere far away and try to matter. It was the first real conversation Sundar had since arriving. But things were not going to get easier. The next lecture, Professor Armitage handed out a group assignment. Teams of 4, he announced. Create a concept that solves a real-world problem using technology. Deadline is in 3 weeks. Choose your teams now. Sundar looked around. Nobody looked at him. Students were forming groups quickly. Old friends, classmates, people who knew each other. Sundar stood awkwardly near the edge of the room. After a minute, Emily waved him over. "You with us?" she asked. He nodded. Emily's group had two other members. Rachel, a fast-talking student from New York, and Marcus, a quiet coder from Texas. "Welcome to the outcasts," Emily joked. They laughed. Sundar felt a little more at home. Their idea came from something Sundar had written in his notebook, a smart communication assistant for non-native English speakers. A tool that could listen, simplify complex sentences, and offer polite responses. In real time, something that could help students like him. They began building. Days turned into nights. They coded in libraries, brainstormed over sandwiches, debugged errors over video calls. Sundar barely slept. But he didn't mind. This wasn't just a project. This was personal. Then came the review day. Professor Armitage visited each group, listened, and gave sharp feedback. When he reached Sundar's team, he folded his arms. "Show me." Sundar demoed the assistant. He explained how it listened to voice input, identified jargon, and returned simplified phrasing. He showed the data, the logic, the empathy behind the product. Professor Armitage said nothing for a while then. He leaned forward. "This," he said slowly, "is a crutch. Not a tool." The team looked confused. "You are teaching people to rely on a machine instead of pushing themselves to adapt. That's weakness, not innovation." Sundar's face tightened. Respectfully, he said, "Some people don't have time to adapt. Some are drowning while others are learning to swim. This helps them stay afloat." A murmur ran through the room. The professor's smile faded. "We'll see," he said. "Present it next week, but be ready. I don't reward pity projects." As he walked away, Emily touched Sundar's arm. "He's wrong," she whispered. "It matters." Dar nodded. But inside, a storm was growing. He walked home in silence that night. He thought about his mother, who never finished school, about two. His father, who rode a bike to work every day just to buy him a second-hand laptop. He thought about all the times he had to explain his accent, his silence, his strange ideas. He wasn't building a crutch. He was building a bridge. And next week, he was going to prove it, but something unexpected was waiting. The night before the presentation, Sundar received an email. Subject: urgent due to a scheduling change. Your group will present first. Professor Armitage has invited several faculty members to observe. The email ended with one line. Be prepared to defend your work. The morning air was cold. Sharp winds slid through the empty streets as Sundar walked alone toward the campus. His backpack was heavy, not just with his laptop and notes, but with the pressure of what lay ahead. His group had practiced for days. Sundar had refined every line of code, rehearsed every possible question, but he couldn't ignore the weight in his chest. This wasn't just a presentation. It felt like a test of who he was. When he reached the building, Emily, Rachel, and Marcus were already there. Emily gave a quick nod. "You okay?" "Yes, okay as I can be," Sundar replied softly. They walked into the hall. It looked different. Today, more lights, more chairs, and something else. In the front row sat not just Professor Armitage, but three other faculty members. One wore thick glasses and held a tablet. Another was adjusting a microphone. The third seemed half asleep, but opened his eyes when Sundar entered. Professor Armitage stood. "Today," said, "we begin with a team that thinks technology should make life easier for the weak. Let's see if it makes sense." His words hit like a slap. Sundar swallowed the sting and walked up to the podium. Emily took the lead. She introduced the Project TAN Adaptive Communication Assistant for non-native English speakers and neurodiverse students. Rachel followed, explaining the user interface and how the app learned from repeated corrections. Marcus presented the architecture, speaking softly, but with clear logic. Then it was Sundar's turn. He walked to the center, holding the remote. "Language is not just words," he began. "It's power. When you don't understand, you don't just miss information. You miss opportunities. You miss belonging." He clicked, and a video began. It showed a student shy, confused, struggling in a classroom. Then the assistant helped him ask a question. Make a friend. Speak in a group. The audience watched silently. This tool does not replace learning, Sundar said. It gives people the time and space to grow. It levels the playing field. The demo worked perfectly. Real-time input, simplified response, voice clarity. There was a pause. For a moment, felt like maybe, just maybe, they had won them over. But then Professor Armitage stood. Questions. He asked the other faculty members. The woman with the tablet raised her hand. Can this be used for cheating? Sundar answered calmly. No, it doesn't generate answers. It only rephrases in simpler terms. The man with the microphone leaned forward. How is this different from existing AI tools? Those tools are built for general users, Marcus explained. Ours is trained on academic language and local cultural cues. The third professor grunted. Seems idealistic. Dar smiled gently. Most innovation begins with idealism. Professor Armitage walked slowly to the front. Let me ask a final question, he said. To Sundar. Sundar looked up. You speak of equality, Armitage began. But don't you think adapting the world for the least prepared holds back the best prepared? Should we slow down everyone for the sake of those who can't keep up? The room froze. Sundar didn't answer right away. He glanced at Emily. Then at the screen behind him, finally he said, You're asking the wrong question. It's not about slowing others down. It's about speeding up those who've been left behind. A few students clapped quietly. Professor Armitage didn't. Smile. Thank you, he said. You may sit. They returned to their seats. After the session, the class buzzed with conversation. Some students whispered in admiration. Others looked away. The group left the hall slowly. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Rachel shook her head. He hates us. Marcus stayed quiet. Emily walked beside Sundar. You did amazing, she said. Sundar didn't reply. Because deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Later that evening, he checked his inbox. There it was. Subject. Project feedback. Your presentation was technically sound but lacked critical engagement with deeper leadership concepts. Grade B. Feedback. Your idea encourages dependence and lacks vision for long-term leadership development. Suggested reading, The Necessity of Struggle in Leadership, Professor J. Armitage. Nurse stared at the screen dab. He closed his laptop slowly. This wasn't about the grade. This was about something else. Professor Armitage had made up his mind. And he had used that moment under the eyes of other faculty to subtly, publicly reduce Sundar's value. It wasn't loud, but it was clear the next day. Sundar went to the library and looked up the professor's past work. He discovered something strange in articles and lectures. Professor Armitage had long promoted a theory. True leadership must emerge through adversity without external support. He argued that tools and aids made people soft. He believed the best leaders were those who rose through raw struggle. Unaided, Sundar sat back, absorbing this. Now, it made sense. The professor didn't dislike Sundar's code. He disliked the idea. Behind it, he believed that empathy made people weak. Sundar closed the book gently then. Slowly. He smiled, because now he understood the rules of the game. He wasn't here to win approval. He was here to change the game. But before he could make his next move, something unexpected happened. Emily ran up to him that evening, breathless. You need to see this, she said, handing him her phone. On it was a video, a clip from the presentation. Just one part, Professor Armitage saying, We can't adapt the world for the least prepared. Someone had uploaded it with the caption, Elitist professor shuts down immigrant student trying to innovate for others. The comments were exploding. Some defended the professor, but many were furious. This is disgusting. This kid made something beautiful and gets mocked for it. Respect to Sundar for staying calm. Emily looked nervous. I don't know who posted it, but it's spreading. Sundar took a deep breath. This is not what I wanted, he said. I know, she replied, but maybe it's what you need. He walked home slowly that night. His mind was spinning. The video was out there now. People were watching, and not just students. By morning, a university blog had picked it up, then a small local newspaper, and a tech website. Indian students' idea sparks debate about leadership and empathy in tech. Professor Armitage didn't respond publicly, but 2 days later, Sundar received a message. It was from the dean. Please meet me in my office tomorrow morning. The dean's office was at the top floor of the oldest building on campus. The elevator creaked on the way up, as if warning Sundar that whatever waited behind those doors wasn't going to be easy. When he stepped out, the hallway was quiet. He walked slowly, heart pounding, until he reached the large oak door with a brass nameplate that read Dr. Nathan Hallowell, Dean of Students. He hesitated for just a moment, then knocked. "Come in," a voice called out. Sundar opened the door and stepped inside. The room smelled like old books and polished wood. Heavy shelves lined the walls. In the center sat Dean Hallowell, an older man with tired eyes and silver hair. He looked up and gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." Sundar obeyed. The dean didn't speak for a while. He stared at a tablet on his desk, scrolling through something. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked finally. "I assume it's about the video," Sundar replied carefully. The dean nodded. "It has over 2 million views now. It's been shared by tech forums, education blogs, and a few media outlets. One of them called it a moment of academic cruelty." Sundar lowered his eyes. "I didn't post it." "I believe you," the dean said. "But it's caused a stir." He leaned back in his chair. "Professor Armitage is respected. Controversial? Yes. But he's shaped this university's leadership program for years, and now he's at the center of a very public debate." Sundar looked up. "So what happens now?" The dean didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "Tell me, Sundar, do you believe you were humiliated?" Sundar thought about the question. Then he said, "I believe I was dismissed."
Oh.
The dean nodded slowly. "You handled yourself with dignity," he said. "That's why I'm asking you this personally. Would you be willing to speak at the upcoming Tech Ethics Symposium?" Sundar blinked. "Me, yes," the dean said. "We've received requests. People want to hear your side, your idea, your story." Sundar sat still. This was a chance. But it was also a trap, because Professor Armitage would be there too. "I'll do it," Sundar said quietly. The dean smiled faintly. "I thought you would." The days leading up to the symposium were filled with tension. Some students approached Sundar to offer support. Others avoided him. In class, Professor Armitage never mentioned the video. He taught as usual, sharp, dismissive, always in control. But Sundar could feel the change. Air had shifted. He worked harder than ever, refined the project, practiced his speech, prepared for every question. The night before the event, he sat in the campus cafe with Emily. "You're nervous," she said gently. "Yes," he admitted. "That's okay," she said. "But don't go in there trying to prove you're right. Go in there showing who you are." He looked at her. "What if I fail?" She smiled. "Then fail honestly." The symposium was held in the large auditorium. Hundreds of people showed up, students, professors, even a few reporters. The stage had 2 chairs and a moderator's table. Sundar stood backstage, his hands cold. Professor Armitage arrived last. He wore a dark blazer, his usual red scarf, and an unreadable expression. The moderator introduced them both. "Today, we discuss empathy, innovation, and what it truly means to lead in a world of increasing complexity." He gestured to Sundar. "Mr. Pichai, please begin." Sundar walked to the podium. His heart beat wildly, but his voice stayed steady. "I grew up in a small city in India," he began. "Our home didn't have much, but my parents believed in education, in hard work, and in kindness." He paused. "I came here. I thought success was about knowledge, about code, about answers." He looked at the crowd, "But now I see it's also about being heard." He told the story of the project, of the struggles non-native speakers face, of how silence can feel like invisibility, and how his tool wasn't a shortcut, but a second chance. The room was silent. Then it was Professor Armitage's turn. He stood slowly and walked to the podium. "I do not deny the intelligence or sincerity of my student," he said. "But I question the philosophy." He looked at Sundar. "We live in a world that rewards strength. It's not just intellect, but emotional resilience. I do not believe in adapting the system to fit the individual. I believe in shaping the individual to meet the system." He turned to the audience. "Tools like these," he said, pointing to the screen, "risk coddling minds. They solve problems on the surface, but leave the roots untouched." There were murmurs. Sundar stepped forward. "Sir," he said, "may I ask a question?" The moderator nodded. "Double quotes, please." Sundar looked directly at Professor Armitage. "Have you ever had to pretend you understood something just to avoid looking stupid?" The room went still. Professor Armitage narrowed his eyes. "That's not relevant." "It is," Sundar said softly, "because that's what millions of students do every day." He paused. Not because they're lazy, not because they're weak, but because they weren't given the same starting line. A few students clapped. Others stayed quiet. "I'm not asking the system to be easier," Sundar said. "I'm asking it to be fair." After the session, the moderator thanked them both. People stood. Some applauded. The auditorium. Sundar was mobbed by students. Some thanked. Some asked for the app link. Some said they felt seen for the first time, but as he walked away, someone stepped into his path. Professor Armitage. They stood face to face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the professor said, "You have your audience now." "I didn't want one," Sundar replied. "I wanted a voice." Armitage nodded slightly. "Be careful with it," he said, and walked away. The next morning, Sundar opened his email. There was a new message. Subject, internship invitation. We were impressed by your presentation. We'd like to meet. Google X team. He stared at the screen. For the first time since arriving, Sundar allowed himself to smile, but as he reached for his phone to call his parents, a new email arrived. Subject, academic conduct review. Urgent. It was from the university, and it wasn't good. Sundar sat frozen in front of the screen. The words on the email blurred and sharpened again as he read them over and over. Academic conduct review, urgent. It felt like a punch in the stomach, the kind that knocked the air out but didn't leave a bruise. He clicked the email open. Inside was a formal message from the university's Office of Academic Integrity. It stated that concerns had been raised about the originality and authorship of the recent class project presented at the symposium. He was required to attend a closed-door hearing with a university panel in 3 days. No other details. Were given no name of the accuser, no specifics, just a cold, sterile sentence. Failure to attend will result in automatic disciplinary action. His first thought was confusion. His second was panic. Who would accuse him of something like this? Their project had been built from scratch. Every line of code, every prototype, every interface, they had created it together. His group had worked day and night, tested and refined everything in front of each other. He paced the small apartment, his fingers curling and uncurling. Outside, the city buzzed, uncaring, as if nothing had changed. But for Sundar, the ground had shifted. He called Emily first. She listened quietly as he explained. Then, without hesitation, she said, "We're going to figure this out. You didn't do anything wrong. We all know that." Her voice was steady, but Sundar could hear the strain underneath. She promised to speak to Rachel and Marcus, to make sure everyone was on the same page. The idea that one of them had betrayed him felt impossible. But the accusation had to come from somewhere. Someone, somewhere, had raised a red flag later that night. Sundar sat alone in the campus library, staring at the code again. Line by line, he checked for errors, for anything that might look suspicious to an outsider. Everything was clean. But that didn't matter now. Perception was everything. And in a system where you were already different, already foreign, already uninvited, You didn't need to do something wrong to be treated like a problem 3 days later. He sat in a small, white-walled room. The panel consisted of 3 professors, none of whom he had met before. One of them, a woman with silver-rimmed glasses, opened a folder. "Mr. Pichai," she began, "this is an informal review. Our goal is to understand the concerns and assess whether a formal investigation is necessary." Sundar nodded. He felt small in the oversized chair, like he didn't belong in the frame of this picture. It has been brought to our attention. She continued, "That significant portions of your project may mirror an existing open-source framework created 2 years ago. Are you aware of this?" He blinked. "No, we built the program from scratch. We tested different approaches, but everything we used was original." Another panelist, a man with thick eyebrows and a skeptical tone, added, "Can you provide documentation showing the development timeline? Email logs, version histories, file metadata?" "Yes," Sundar said quickly. "I have it all. I can send it right now." They allowed him to pull out his laptop. He showed them the code. History, timestamps, push logs, even screenshots from group chats where they brainstormed the tool. Everything lined up. Everything matched, but the panel wasn't done. Someone submitted a report claiming the assistant. "Your group built is nearly identical in structure to a tool published on a lesser-known software repository. Even if that wasn't intentional, it could still be considered intellectual overlap." "Can I see the report?" Sundar asked. "Not at this time," the woman replied. "You'll be informed of our decision within a week." As he left the room, a dull ache settled behind his eyes. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about something deeper. Something that felt like it had always been there waiting, quietly, to remind him that no matter how far he came, how hard he worked, there would always be people ready to question his worth. Outside the building, Emily was waiting. "Well?" she asked. Sundar shook his head. "They're not saying much. But someone submitted a report. Who would do that?" she whispered. Sundar didn't answer, but a quiet suspicion had begun to take shape in his mind. Later that night, Rachel texted him. "Can we talk?" They met near the fountain outside the science hall. It was quiet, the sound of the water soft and steady. Rachel looked nervous. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice low. "A week ago, I showed our demo to another professor, just for feedback. I didn't think anything of it. But now I'm wondering if—" She trailed off. Sundar didn't speak. "He asked if it was all your idea," she continued. "I told him it was a team effort, but you led the coding. Maybe he thought—" "Which professor?" Sundar asked. She hesitated. "Dr. Morrissey. Used to work with Armitage." Sundar felt his stomach turn. Dr. Maurice was known for his old-school views, strict, territorial. He had clashed with students in the past for bringing in outsider ideas. If he had a connection to Professor Armitage. Sundar didn't finish the thought. Back in his room, Sundar stared at the wall for a long time. A memory from childhood returned, standing outside his classroom in India, barefoot, while the teacher told him he didn't belong in the science fair because those contests are for English medium kids. Remembered how he had stayed silent, too afraid to speak. But now, he wasn't that child anymore. He opened his laptop and started writing. He detailed the project's creation step by step. He attached logs, charts, development threads, backup files. Then he wrote a letter not just to the panel, but to the university board, the student council, and the tech faculty. In it, he explained the cost of false suspicion. He spoke about innovation, about dignity, about what it meant to build not just code, but bridges. He wrote it not to defend himself, but to show others that silence was no longer an option. He sent it 2 days later. He received a reply, the academic review. Panel had dropped the concern. No evidence of misconduct. No further action required, but no apology either. Just silence. Still, the silence felt different now. Not a wall. A space. A space he could fill as he closed the email. Another message arrived. Subject, Google X follow-up meeting. Confirm me second. Chance was still waiting, but so was something else. Because in the back of his mind, Sundar couldn't stop wondering why had Professor Armitage stayed so quiet during the entire investigation, and deep down he knew the answer wasn't going to be simple or safe. The morning of the Google X meeting was bright and crisp, but Sundar's heart felt heavy. He should have been excited. This was the kind of opportunity he had dreamed about since he was a child. An invitation from one of the most innovative teams in the world. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a shadow lingered. Not just the investigation, not just the doubt, something else. Something he couldn't name, but couldn't ignore either. He left early, walking across campus with slow, thoughtful steps. Every corner reminded him of something late-night coding in the library. The look in Professor Armitage's eyes after the symposium. The quiet support from Emily when no one else had spoken. He didn't feel like a winner. Felt like someone still fighting to be allowed in the room. The meeting itself was surreal. He was ushered into a sleek conference room on a live video call. 3 members from the Google X team appeared on the screen, bright, energetic, asking questions with real curiosity. They had seen the symposium video. They had read his letter. They wanted to know how he thought, not just what he built. He talked about his vision, about empathy and design, about how technology could be human, not just efficient. He explained how the app wasn't just a tool, it was a philosophy. A belief that even the quietest voices deserved clarity and space. They listened carefully. When the call ended, one of them said, "We'll be in touch soon, Sundar." "What?" "Your building knit's important." As he walked back toward campus, the weight in his chest began to lift just a little. Maybe this really was the beginning of something better. But just as he reached the student commons, his phone buzzed. It was Emily. One word appeared on the screen. Urgent. He called her immediately. Her voice was sharp, fast, tense. "You need to see this," she said. Now. They met outside the administration building. She was holding her phone, face pale. She handed it to him without saying another word. On the screen was an article, not from a major news site, but a popular student-run blog that often published campus controversies. The headline read, "Did Sundar Pichai cheat his way to fame?" His stomach dropped. The article rehashed the entire academic conduct case even though it had been closed. It mentioned the original accusation, questioned his authorship, and implied that his rise to attention was more about politics than talent. Worse, it quoted an unnamed faculty source who claimed Sundar strategically played the victim to gain public support. The language was cruel, subtle, dangerous, and then Sundar saw it. At the very end of the article, there was a quote attributed to an experienced professor in the leadership department. "Real leaders don't rely on pity. They earn their place through competition, not sympathy." Sundar stared at the words. He didn't need a name. He knew exactly who it was. The betrayal didn't surprise him. Not anymore. But it still hurt. Not because he expected fairness from Professor Armitage, but because he had hoped that after everything, after seeing what Sundar stood for, after witnessing the storm he had walked through, there would be some respect, some honesty. Instead, he had been quietly stabbed in the back. Again, the next day in class, Sundar sat in silence. Professor Armitage lectured as usual, voice crisp, eyes scanning the room like nothing had changed. He didn't even glance at Sundar, but every word felt sharper, every moment heavier. After class ended, Sundar stood up and waited by the door. Students filtered out around him. Finally, Professor Armitage approached. Sundar stepped forward. "Sir," he said quietly, "can we talk?" The professor paused, then nodded slightly. "My office," he said. They walked in silence. Once inside, the door closed. The air in the room was still. Sundar stood, hands at his sides. "You spoke to the blog," he said. The professor said nothing. "You know I didn't cheat," Sundar continued. "You know the panel found nothing. So why are you still trying? To break me?" Professor Armitage finally spoke, voice calm. "'Cause you don't belong here." Sundar's breath caught. The words were quiet, not shouted, not cruel on the surface. They sliced clean through. "You're smart," Armitage went on. "Talented. Maybe even a good person. but you're not one of us. You don't understand. The rules, you think passion and decency are enough? They're not. Not in the real world. Not in leadership. Sundar stared at him, stunned. I was trying to prepare you, the professor said. The world won't reward kindness. It will. Eat you alive. And if I don't teach you that now, it will destroy you later. Sundar took a long, slow breath. Then maybe the world needs to change, he said. Armitage gave a bitter smile. That's what every idealist says before they give up. I'm not giving up, Sundar said, voice steady now. I'm building something better. Not just for me, for people like me. No matter how hard you try, you can't stop that. For the first time, the professor's expression flickered. Not anger, not pride, something like fear. Sundar turned and walked out of the office. He didn't slam the door. He didn't look back. He had come to this school with nothing but hope and a laptop. And now, for the first time, he was leaving that room not just as a student, but as someone becoming something greater. As he stepped outside, the sun was setting. The sky burned orange behind the trees. His phone buzzed again. This time, the message was, Short, we'd like to offer you a place on our summer research team. Welcome to Google X. He stood still, letting the warmth of that moment settle into his bones. But even in that peace, he knew something. His story wasn't finished, because, while the battles inside the classroom were done, the real tests outside in the world was just beginning. Summer came faster than Sundar expected. One moment he was staring down false accusations and backhanded attacks, and the next he was boarding a flight to California. The Google X campus was nothing like the stone buildings of his university. It was open, alive, filled with quiet movement and strange possibilities. Engineers rode past him on bicycles. Voices bounced through glass walls, speaking in a dozen languages. Here, no one cared where he came from, only what he could build. And yet, even in this bright new world, Sundar carried something with him. Not bitterness, not pride, something deeper. A memory. A reminder of who he was and where he started. On his first day, he was assigned to a team working on adaptive learning software. The project felt familiar, like an evolution of what he had started in class. He shared his ideas cautiously at first, still unsure if his voice carried weight. But slowly, things changed. People listened. They asked questions not to test him, but to understand him. By the second week, he was leading small brainstorm sessions. By the third, he was writing key modules. By the fourth, his team lead pulled him aside and said, You have something, Sundar. Not just skills vision. He worked harder than ever, not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove his dream right. He wanted to build something that mattered, not for rewards, not for revenge. For that silent kid sitting alone in the back row. 4. The student too shy to ask a question. For the outsider always trying to translate their thoughts before speaking. One night, long after everyone had left, Sundar sat alone in the empty lab, watching his prototype run. It was still rough, still clunky, but it worked. It listened. It simplified. It helped. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel proud. But one morning, an email arrived that stopped him cold. Subject: Guest lecturer invitation, University Leadership Symposium matched. It was a message from the student council. They were hosting a new event titled Voices of Change. The theme was resilience, progress, and the future of leadership. They wanted Sundar to return and give the opening talk. At first, he stared at the message without moving. Him didn't want to go back. Too many memories. Too much pain. But then another part of him, the part that had stayed quiet for too long, whispered something different. Go back, not to fight. To finish, when he returned to campus, it was almost autumn. The trees had begun to turn. Golden leaves fell gently across the stone walkways. It was beautiful, in a way he hadn't noticed before. When he walked through the university gates, people stared. Some waved. Some avoided his eyes. But Sundar didn't need their approval anymore. He wasn't here to be accepted. He was here to speak. The auditorium was packed. Students filled every seat, some he recognized. And he didn't. Faculty members lined the back wall. The dean sat in the front row. And to Sundar's surprise, so did Professor Armitage. He walked to the podium, calm and steady. He didn't start with a joke. He didn't quote a famous leader. He just told the truth. When I first came here, I was afraid, he said. Not a failure, of not being seen. He told them about building the app, about the criticism, the investigation, the quiet attempts to break his spirit. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. He spoke about empathy. It's about how the smallest effort to understand someone else could change their world. He said, innovation isn't just about thinking different. It's about caring different, leading different. He paused. Then he looked out across the room. We don't need perfect leaders, he said. We need human ones. When he finished, the room was quiet then. Slowly, people stood. Not everyone, but enough. The applause was real. And in that moment, Sundar knew. He had not just survived, he had arrived. After the event, a few students came up to him. One of them, a tall, nervous boy with thick glasses, said, Your tool helped me speak in class for the first time. Sundar smiled, shook his hand, and said nothing. Because sometimes silence was enough. As he left the auditorium, Professor Armitage was waiting by the door. They stood face to face again. This time, the professor looked older, less certain. You spoke well, Armitage said. Sundar nodded. Thank you. There was a pause. Then the professor said, almost quietly, You changed more than I thought you would. Sundar met his gaze. So did you, he said. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Some stories don't end in apologies. They end in understanding. A week later, Sundar returned to California. His project at Google X moved forward. He was offered a full-time role after graduation. He accepted, but he never forgot the lecture hall, the pressure, the doubt, or the fight. He didn't erase those memories. He honored them, because those were the chapters that shaped him, not just as a coder, but as a leader, as a voice, as a bridge. Years later, someone asked Sundar during an interview, What gave you the strength to keep going when others tried to silence you? He thought for a moment, then said softly, I stopped trying to fit in and started building the place I belonged.